Today, I'd like to talk about the subject of cults and religions. And the reason why I want to bring up this topic is because I fear we're going to be having an explosion in the number of cults appearing in the next 10 years or so. The reason is because of the collapse of the family as an institution for most people. Most people these days aren't getting along with their families. There's a lot of internal rivalries, bickering, backstabbing, as well as divorces, custody battles, and ideologically driven child abuse. As millions of families break down across the globe, there'll be millions of people looking for new families. And on the surface, cults appear to offer what these wounded and traumatized emotional refugees are seeking: community, support, self-respect, and a meaningful life. However, cults are like any other shady fraud. They promise to solve all your problems while doing nothing more than deliver you into the waiting arms of debt collectors. First of all, let's start off with some definitions. What is a cult? What is religion? And how can we distinguish between the two? Well, the word cult has come a long way over the past 1,000 years or so. In the beginning of history, the ancient Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans had many gods. And each of these gods had their own sets of shrines, temples, and ceremonial events to be celebrated. However, the upkeep of a building or supply of food and incense for ceremonies is time-consuming and expensive. Someone had to step forward to take care of these things. The people who volunteered to take care of these things and to spend their time and money to make sure the needs of the gods were met were called cultists. And the word cult here means to take care of. And we see this use of the word cult in many words in the language still today. Agriculture, meaning to take care of crops and livestock. Cultivate, meaning to take care of something. We also see the definition of the word cultist still in our language in words like culture, referring to the fruits of people who work harder and take better care of themselves than most other people in society. Also, a cultured person is a person who takes better care of themselves and the people around them. Yet, somewhere along the line, the definition of cult deviated from this positive, helpful vibe into this sinister, creepy definition that we know of today. And I don't think this was an accident. I believe that unscrupulous, wicked individuals realized that cultists were very popular people in the community, especially with the ladies and those wanting to donate to a worthwhile charity. These wicked people decided to pretend to be cultured people, pretended to be cultists, so they could collect donations meant for religious upkeep and to cash in on the status of being a cultist to sexually exploit and torment religious people for their own benefit and no one else's. This is a phenomenon more commonly referred to as virtue signaling these days, and sometimes as playing the virtuous victim. Thus, we come to the modern definition of a cult as something like this. A cult is a community masquerading as a religion, but in reality exists to serve the egotistical fetishes of the cult leader, especially if they involve sex, sadism, money, and power. And this leads to the next question: what is the definition of religion? You might be surprised to find that there's no clear, universally accepted definition of a religion. The Romans considered it to be respect for what is sacred, reverence for the gods, a sense of righteousness, moral obligation, and sanctity. Which might sound a bit odd to our ears today, but it's actually not bad a definition as they go. Another definition is based on one suspected etymology of the word religion, meaning to bind, referring to agreements or covenants binding men and gods into an alliance with each other. A common definition of religion around today is the belief and worship of a supernatural entity, i.e. God. However, these definitions don't come close to encapsulating how complicated religions tend to be, with scriptures, rituals, ceremonies, rites, traditions, hymns, and literature. They also suggest that believing in ghosts or fairies alone makes a person religious. The problem with definitions concerning rituals, rites, and traditions is that these definitions, funnily enough, start to merge with the definition of culture. Is a backyard barbecue as same as an animal sacrifice, for example? Some people think they are, some people disagree, but that's one of the problems. If you're going to define it by rituals, well, how do you separate culture from religion? Now, Some people say that cults and religions are essentially the same thing, only a religion is more popular and longer lasting, but I disagree with this, and point out that while a butcher and a surgeon have many things in common, like cults and religions, they do very different jobs. Cult leaders are, in my view, spiritual butchers. They gut their followers and exploit them for sex and cash. While religious leaders are surgeons carefully working to stitch up spiritual wounds and to excise dangerous ideas that would be cancerous for the community over time. This leads to my personal definition of religion. A religion is a set of binding principles and behaviors that aid group survival over time. For example, most religions have prohibitions against all sorts of things. Certain sexual behaviors, certain foods, certain occupations, certain hobbies and interests, all things that in general promote a fertile and expansive community. Consider some of the dietary limitations for religions, and I use this example because it's not likely to upset people. No eating alone, no eating meat on Fridays, no eating pork, no eating beef, no eating meat, full stop. No eating food that wasn't supervised by another member of the faith when they were preparing it, no drinking alcohol, no taking psychedelic drugs, no eating chocolate for 40 days each year. I don't even need to tell you which religions practice most of these. You probably already know the religions that have these dietary restrictions. You might also know that several religions share some of these prohibitions in common with each other. Why do these religions have these dietary limitations? Consider that speculative origin of the word religion, meaning to bind. These limitations are about binding or self-control, also known as self-responsibility. These restrictions are in some way meant to help the community and the individual stay safe. Consider that eating too much meat or sugar is bad for you, so limiting your consumption of some foods is healthy. Also, if you eat less, there's more for other people in your community to eat if there's a food shortage. Consider that eating alone is bad for you, so eating communally or eating with your family is a better habit to have. Consider that eating food prepared by your enemies is foolish, so make sure food is produced by your own kith and kin. And consider that certain food items are poisonous or easily infected with an infectious disease, like swine and cattle, so avoiding those items might boost your personal and group health over time. Thus, religions are about helping the individual and the community, while cult is about helping feed a cult leader with narcissistic supply. This creates a spectrum that I call the religio-cultic spectrum. Over here we have strong religion, which is focused exclusively on helping the group survive, sometimes to the detriment of the individual. In the middle, we have a moderate religion that aims to help individuals grow and thrive as much as a group. And over here, we have cults, which are only about one person devouring everyone else as perverse sacrifices to their egotism. Another way you could put it is this: group first, balanced, me and only me first. To make matters more interesting, consider that many religions started off as cults. However, with the death of their cult leader, the adherents of the cult reformed their cult to something less egotistical and more altruistic, and thus they started moving along the spectrum in the direction of greater religiosity. While many congregations of Christians, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, etc. are well known to slide away from being religious communities and becoming cults centered around a charismatic preacher. So just because your group might call itself a well-established religion, it might actually have been usurped by a cult pretending to be a religion. So the last question is, how can you distinguish between a cult and a religion? Well, here's some questions to ask yourself or to ask someone that you're concerned might be in a cult and to have a discussion about, which hopefully will help you figure out where it belongs on the spectrum. Am I giving more than I am receiving from my spiritual teacher? Does my spiritual teacher exploit me sexually, financially, and emotionally? Am I allowed to ask difficult questions? Am I being treated with respect in my community? Does my spiritual leader ask for, demand, suggest, or encourage sacrifices for him or her that he or she doesn't reciprocate? Does my spiritual leader encourage justice and fairness in my community, or are they just trying to isolate me and keep me controlled? Does my spiritual leader promote the interests of the entire group, or just for himself or herself? Spending time meditating on these questions should help anyone better gauge whether they are in a cult or a religion or something transitioning between the two. So anyway, I hope that really helps people who are struggling with cults in their life, which sadly is becoming more and more common these days. And until next time, stay safe. Per Spera ad Astra.